Hello everyone, welcome back to Trash Academy. My name is Eliseo and today we're going to be talking a little bit more about plastics. Now we just got done doing our lesson of plastic by numbers, so now you actually know that there are 7 different types of plastic and it'll help you make safe decisions next time you're at the store. Now today we're going to be talking about where all that plastic actually ends up and what are oceanic gyres. Now if you don't know what oceanic gyres are, stay tuned because in this lesson we're going to be learning a little bit more about what they mean and how they are affecting us. Now let's take a step back and look at our planet from the eyes of an astronaut. From here, we can see that our planet is a very unique planet because 71% of it is actually covered in water. Now, all this water is found in rivers, streams, and oceans, and all this water actually gives life to every single plant and animal that we find here on Earth. But our planet doesn't really look exactly like this picture, right? It's a lot more different and realistic. So let's look at our oceans and see what our oceans actually look like in real life. Now, we sometimes tend to forget that we live on an amazing planet here on planet Earth. And by taking a step back, we can actually see how our planet's oceans connect everyone and everything here on land. Now, we sometimes think that, oceans separate different people, countries, and continents, but the truth is that we all depend on the same oceans for our survival. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is actually a video or an animation made by NASA that shows how alive our oceans are and how connected this whole planet is, just like veins on a human body. Now, throughout these oceans, you do find different migrating animals such as whales, sharks, and turtles. And today we're going to dive deeper into what actually ends up from our cities here in the middle of our oceans. So let's take a journey and let's pretend that we're one of these plastic bottles going out to sea. We're going to pretend we're going to be on one of these donuts and see where the ocean actually takes us. So here's a map of the ocean currents all around the world. Now remember that we are on a floating donut, so just like a plastic bottle does out in the oceans. And now you are on a new journey as a plastic bottle, making its way into one of these giant oceanic gyres. Now, you might realize that on this map, you can connect any of the dots or arrows and see where the circles start to form out here in our oceans. Now, these are called ocean gyres, and you can see about 5 of them on the map. The North Pacific Gyre, the South Pacific Gyre, the North Atlantic Gyre, the South Atlantic Gyre, and the Indian Oceanic Gyre. Now, here's another picture that actually helps you see the oceanic gyres a lot clearer. Now, we have 5 all around the world, and on this picture, you can actually see where they're located all around our planet. Now, here we have a video of our planet actually rotating, and remember, as our planet rotates, it also drives and moves the water of our oceans on the surface. It also creates different winds throughout our planet, and here you can actually see how big these oceanic gyres actually are.
January 10th, 1992, a container ship traveling from Hong Kong to Tacoma, Washington, loses 12 containers overboard. One of them sets loose thousands of tiny yellow plastic ducks on the currents of the North Pacific.
The currents carry the ducks all over the world.
So months later, they start washing up on the coast of Alaska, turning this toy spill into an accidental experiment. So from the Ducky study, you get real-time data about the currents in the North Pacific.
The accidental duck experiment is still providing information today.
They're almost indestructible. I mean, literally 20 years after they hit the ocean, they're still washing up on beaches around the world.
Now, there are 2 maps on the screen that you can see, and one of them is the rubber ducky, and one of them is actually the root of a plastic bottle that we took earlier with our donuts. Now, you can start to see that they look pretty much the same or identical, right? And that means that these rubber duckies that were released out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean started taking these currents and ended up in these oceanic gyres. And from there, they ended up in, Chile, Australia, Indonesia, and Europe, and places even in Tacoma, Washington. So next time you're at the beach and you're walking on the sand, try to look for one of these duckies. And if you do, now you know where it came from. Now, some of you have probably heard of this giant island made out of plastic that exists in the middle of our Pacific Ocean. And it is true that there's a lot of plastic trash in the middle of our Pacific Ocean, but it doesn't really form an island. Now, when I think of an island, I like to think of a place where I could stand on or maybe walk on or even jump and climb on. The truth is that all this plastic doesn't form an island, it forms a cloud. Now, when we think of clouds, we think of them as always changing in shape, always changing in size, and this is what happens to all the plastic in our oceans. The more time a plastic spends underneath the sun or in our oceans, the smaller and smaller it gets because it tends to break more and more. Now, The more it breaks and the smaller it gets, the bigger the problem it is, not just for us, but also for fish that live out here in our oceans. Now, remember that different plastics do different things in water. Some of them float and some of them sink all the way to the bottom. Now, when we're thinking of ways to clean all this mess up, we have to think of all the plastics everywhere in our oceans. Now, scientists like to call this cloud of plastic smog. And here's a picture of what it kind of looks like. Now, remember that most of the plastics we actually can't see from the surface. They're actually all the way underwater. Now, a few years back, 5 Gyres actually did a study and visited every single oceanic gyre on this planet. And they actually came up with a number or a global estimate of how much plastic is actually found in our oceans. And if you can see here on the screen, they actually found 5.25 trillion particles of plastic in our oceans. Now, what does that mean? Because I really wish I could count that high. That means that there's actually 500 times more plastic in our oceans than there actually are stars in our galaxy. Now, that's a lot of plastic. Now, during this time, we also took samples of each individual gyre to see what would come up during the study. And on the screen, you'll start to see some pictures of some of the things that came up during these samples. Now, here we have some from the North Atlantic, and you'll start to see some of them have fish, and a lot of them, or almost all of them, are covered in microplastics or some kind of plastic. Now, some of them have jellyfish, some algae, and even small crabs. But we do have to connect the dots and see how these small plastics and these big plastics are affecting the communities of animals and fish that are found in our oceans, and how they might be connecting back to us. Now, here is a video that shows a little bit of the food web and what kinds of creatures depend on these small fish known as anchovies and sardines in order to survive in our oceans. Now, we do have to remember that these small sardines and anchovies that came up in our samples are actually feeding on zooplankton and phytoplankton. Now, zooplankton are about the size of microplastics, and a lot of these fish are actually pumping their stomachs full of plastic. Now, in this video, you'll start to see a giant bait ball or a school of these fish, and the different kinds of animals depend on these fish for their survival. Different kinds of dolphins, whales, sharks, tunas, and it comes to no surprise that even humans also depend on these fish for our survival. Now, remember, in order to stop using plastic, we have to practice using less and less plastic every day. On the screen, we actually have a few samples of what you could do at home just by using a reusable water bottle, a reusable bag, or even reusable containers when you go out to eat. Now, I do want to ask all of you this final question of what is the best way to end this plastic pollution problem that we have today? Now, all of you are probably thinking of different ways to clean up the plastic in order to use less plastic. But actually, the most effective way in order to stop or end this plastic pollution problem is actually by changing policy. So what does changing policy actually look like? Well, here I have an example of a few organizations, including 5 Gyres.
Environmental activists this morning are applauding a new law signed by President Obama this week. It outlaws microbeads that are used in personal care products. DeMarco Morgan shows us how these particles that make us clean are making lakes and rivers dirty. DeMarco, good morning.
Good morning. The bill is known as the Microbead Free Waters Act, and it passed Congress with bipartisan support. It's designed to eliminate tiny bits of plastic from products many of us use every day. Microbeads are tiny pieces of plastic found in many health and beauty products, including soap, body scrub, and toothpaste. They are generally used to exfoliate or add polish. No bigger than a grain of salt, these microplastics are a big concern for environmental scientists. They say the tiny particles are a harmful source of ocean and lake pollution.
We now know the fish that we harvest from our Great Lakes are eating these microbeads. Ends up on your dinner plate. It's going from your face right back into your body.
Scientist Marcus Erickson and his team at the 5 Gyres Institute study plastic pollution in waters around the world. He's found microbeads in the San Francisco Bay and in high concentrations in the Great Lakes. Not all water treatment plants are able to filter them out.
They're absorbing industrial chemicals, pesticides from farms, even oil drops from cars will stick to these microplastics and microbeads. At that point, they can enter the food chain.
A single cosmetic product can contain up to 300,000 non-biodegradable microbeads. In September, California banned sales of products containing microbeads. Assemblymember Richard Bloom authored the legislation and is thrilled that Congress is following California's lead.
Now, if you're curious about any of the research here at 5 Gyres, or you just want to find out more, make sure to stop by our website at 5gyres.org. Now, I want to thank you all for joining us once again here on Trash Academy. My name is Eliseo, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next lessons. Till next time, y hasta luego.